Hey guys, Bugcat7 here. Okay, it is Thursday, December 9th, 2021, and I'd like to thank you for visiting the Stonewall Research channel here on YouTube. I really do appreciate it. Alright, guys, well, I think I have a very interesting video for you here today of some amazing large scale earthworks and satellite images and some aerial photography that perhaps you never saw before. And this is like similar to John Jensen's work with the ancient canal builders. Here's John Jensen right here. And what's interesting about these earthworks, and what's interesting to me, is that it's heavily centered on, waterworks, canals, and artificial ponds and lakes and things like this from these far ancient times that are just so interesting. But John Jensen has covered this. He's the first one to sort of bring this out. Mentioned it on Sylvie's New Earth channel some time ago, many years ago, and that's how I became acquainted with it. So, he has all these satellite images of these artificial harbors where, when you look at these things, the scale and scope of these things, in his opinion, okay, after looking at all these things and based on what he can determine, the scope and the purpose of these things, could only demonstrate a sort of heavily import export system going on because of the scale of these things. It's, 1,900 foot artificial harbors in the middle of nowhere below sea level, but obviously artificially made at some point when the sea level was lower, some 7 or 8 thousand years ago, according to him. All right, these could be usable. There would be dry land on the edges of these artificial harbors. A lot of them are here right on Long Island where I'm at. Many of them, all concentrated in one place. I think probably the most in the world here to be found on Long Island, which is very curious to me. Well, right just north of that, you have this whole network of stone wall constructions right above it. Okay. So another thing that interests me is that John Jensen says, based on the scope of these things, it says that the population would have to be somewhere between 200 million and 500 million people in the Americas total. Okay, based on these artificial canals and harbors and other artificial earthworks that demonstrate, huge scale waterworks. And, that's just not a simple thing to engineer. You have to have some kind of knowledge of this stuff. You just don't do it willy nilly and see what happens and whatnot. But these artificial harbors demonstrate something going on a rather large scale. Okay. So who is coming here to utilize these things on the scale it was? And was it little tiny canoes at the time of the quote unquote cavemen and all that kind of, what is the purpose of these things? So obviously they demonstrate. So 200 to 500 million people in the Americas, let's say. Okay, so in my mind, it would demonstrate, and of course it's all been destroyed. And where is the evidence of it? Well, there is some evidence of it if you look for it in some megalithic constructions here in the Americas, North America and South America. Okay, they might demonstrate these things going even further back in antiquity. But they would have the same sort of issues and problems, like managing wildlife, for example, because these people were apparently all into management. It's all about management. It's obviously their management and these earthworks that they produce and waterways and systems, et cetera, demonstrate a high intelligence. And, you know, they must have had this with a population that large, which is conceivable, considering we know what we know about the conquistadors and killing off some 14 and 19 million people just in the Central America alone, you know, not counting the North and South America. So, how many people died here, but how many people were here prior to that in some ancient time in the past where it seems to be some sort of major production going on? And when you see the level of these earthworks, etc., um, there's major things going on. And that's what I say about the stone walls of New England as well. There's some major things going on, okay, where these stone giants, whoever they were that built these stone walls that the Algonquin were friendly with and knew all about. And again, this also, what interests me about this article is that many of these waterworks and what their intention was is not only for growing food crop and other things, not related to whatever plants, medicinal plants, nut trees, whatever it might be. The whole entire forests were managed according to Charles C. Mann and the research that he did, talking about North and South and Central, everywhere being managed agriculturally by these ancient peoples, and what kind of knowledge it would take to do all this stuff. And who were those people who were kicking around back then exactly? And where'd they all go? Okay. Well, again, the interest to me is what their diet was. Why is that? Why do I focus on that one particular thing? Okay, so in more than several accounts in the Americas, okay, when the skulls were examined by a local dentist, quote unquote, which many of the dentists at those times, in Victorian times, let's say, in early 20th century, served as surgeons as well in some of these remote places, etc. They had knowledge of these skills, however primitive they were back then. But, these people had knowledge of things. And the dentist that examined the quote unquote giants' skulls often remarked by the condition of the teeth, the skull being one of the hardest bones, these skeletons that did not disintegrate completely, so some of the harder bones were left with the skeletons. And, depending on calcification, oxidization, etc., many of the skulls were left. And when the dentist examined them, they exclaimed, that they must have been vegetarians. Okay, so obviously, I don't think that they were pure vegetarians like a cow or, a bison or something like that. They had to be eating something. Okay, so what was it? Okay, that not going to be red meat, because at the time that these dentists were making these evaluations, people's teeth were atrocious, rotten, atrocious teeth. Okay, what was that from? Okay, back in the days where people didn't consume a lot of sweet stuff with a lot of sugar in it and everything, because it cost money, first of all, for that stuff, and you had to eat just regular stuff to survive and whatnot. Okay, it's the red meat, folks, of the land animals, because if your diet is primarily from aquatic, fauna, the meat quality is different. The consistency is different than land animals. Okay, having hundreds of millions of people in the Americas or whatever, how quickly, okay, same problems we have today, management of wildlife. You don't want the wildlife to completely disappear, especially if you need them as a resource or something. So you can't hunt them into extinction right away. with your honey eating deer and antelope every night or whatever. So what were these people involved with to feed themselves on such a large scale for these people? So it seems often to me is that it's the bounty of the water, the bounty of the sea, the bounty of the waterways. This is what they're doing. They're doing fish farming, and it's, it was mentioned in Charles C. Mann's book, okay? And that's what some of these things seem to be about. Okay, but the scale of these things is just incredible. So listen to what it says in here. I mean, look at some of these things that you never saw before. John Jensen doesn't even present these things through his research. You can go look at his research where he mentions this. The scope and scale of these things suggest a population so high. Okay, so, and it's not to say that these people never ate red meat, but it was only reserved for the resource primarily, and it was had to be managed a certain way. Only a certain amount could be taken on a yearly basis. All this stuff. Okay, it's not like us. We just eat whatever we want whenever we want. Okay, eating beef all the time or whatever. So they're found with fishbone necklaces, and does it go all the way back to um, you know, the fish gods, the Dagon gods, what about these fish gods and everything? You have to consider all these things, okay? And, lately people have been, commenting me, loving the pieces and everything, but again, the possibility that, it still remains impossible that the giants were cannibals. They in the extreme circumstances, well, anybody in extreme circumstances, even the Giants or whatever, he's saying like the people from Alive, the soccer team there in the Andes crashing the Andes going to have, you know, buttocks, jerkies from their fellow passenger teammates and stuff like that. Yeah, sure. I mean, in extreme circumstances, we're not talking about extreme circumstances. There's no evidence that the giants were cannibals, but there's a mountain of evidence to show how sophisticated these people were. And the more sophisticated people are, the less likely they are to be cannibals, okay? This whole thing is nonsense. That's 20th century and ancient thinking, okay? It has nothing to do with the Bible. The Bible is not a book of history or facts, okay, folks, and just take it from Bill Donahue, the most hated pastor in Christianity, okay, because he tells the truth about it. It's the hidden meaning. It's not these baby stories. Baby stories don't get you anywhere. It doesn't tell you how to help yourself or anything like that. It doesn't do a thing for you, okay? Why were those baby stories or whatever, Bible was illegal for how many hundreds of years or whatever, and change them around a little bit, in case you get in trouble, boy. If they read something that they can't understand, well, hey, then it's, just babbling to them. But whatever it might be, I'm just saying that there's no evidence for, I wish I had, like, I'm going to make up, I wish I could be a cartoonist. And I just have like a vaulted head cranial Adena guy munching on, ugly Adena guy with a vaulted cranium munching on a baby arm with this red, circle with a bar through it. No, no cannibalism, okay? These people were sophisticated, were ruling over the Hope Well, giving them their ideas. Like the people in Europe were obviously getting from the Bell-Beaker people who brought metallurgy with them and all these different tales of the good giants there in Europe as well. It's the good giants, folks, the Algonquin giants, how kind and friendly they were. Little brother, let us come and keep you safe and teach you this and teach you that, okay? And then when the Iroquois got there, I had to make up stories about them because they had to get rid of them. Okay, just like the Paiute people, the peaceful Paiute people, you know, genocided the Lovelock people based on no bull crap about cannibalism. It was just even tribes, regular, normal Native American tribes, Native people tribes of the Americas. That was a majority used against normal sized tribes that they hated as well. It's just something that you did. to cast aspersions. Are we capable of it? Of course we are. Look at these things here. How about that? Okay. Beat back the hunt, blood on his hands, blood on the bayonet, right? Is that what these people look like? German people? We had German people in the United States. The ugly caricatures, okay, with all this propaganda and nonsense here. How about this stuff here? You know, this is cartoons and stuff like that. Hey, how about this one here? Okay, this is accurate depiction of what the average Japanese person looks like. Okay, like these monsters and everything. Okay, this is what we do now. What do you expect of people in the ancient past? Okay, this whole cannibalism story is a bunch of nonsense, and there is a mountain of evidence to suggest otherwise that you can hear about right on this channel right here. Stonewall Research, okay? We're not about the cannibal giants. That's stupid, antiquated ideas to take you down a rabbit hole to keep you from understanding what the past was really about, okay? And when you see things like this, you have to question in your mind what it was really about some 7 and 8, 9 and 10,000 years ago. Okay, so let's take a look at this. And this comes from a website, atlantisbolivia.org. So it's a public website here. And there's these satellite and aerial photographs that I think of these earthworks and waterworks and things like that I think you're going to be fascinated by. Earlier studies using high-resolution Google Earth satellite imagery shows extensive remains of ancient canals, ponds, artificial islands, and harbors all along the banks of the rivers of Parana, Paraguay, Amazon, the Pantanal, Tabasco in Mexico, and the Louisiana seaboard. They're not including ones by John Jensen, who showed those up here on Long Island by me. Okay, but there's more up here, okay? And again, linked to the stone walls in some fashion because Jimmy Vieira and I think that the giant humanoids built the stone walls for what purpose? Okay, the way that they're built and everything, no entrances, only so high, blah, 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 blah. Okay, there's all these questions to be asked. Well, why about all these things? Okay, these ancient canals and waterways and all things. What were they doing, or what's going on? Okay, and even more sophisticated the further back in the past you go, just even more dumbfounding. Okay, the Louisiana canals are gradually being submerged by the waters of the Gulf of Mexico as a result of the numerous canals created by oil exploration companies, which also makes it difficult to distinguish between ancient canals and those of modern times in the Louisiana zone. And they are fascinating. Okay, John Jensen focuses heavily on these, but here they're showing some here. Above sunken canal complex on the Louisiana seaboard, sunken canal complex. These seem to be mostly former oil company canals, some used for oil pipelines and the other for access to drilling and exploration rigs. Okay, so another day we'll have to look at these Louisiana canals page, but there's many fascinating anomalies there to take a look at as well. They're giving the mainstream their say here because this is an argument against all these things is that it was oil companies involved with this thing, so they're giving them that, okay, even though they suspect, like John Jensen does, that they're not. Many of them were reused by the oil companies and re-dredged and whatever they need to do. You have those canals down there, say, but used by the oil companies, where you have some 300-year-old tree there. That's right in the middle of one of these waterways or whatever. Well, why? John Jensen asked, well, why would you leave that there? There's no reason to leave that there. Why would that be? It just doesn't make any sense. They're going to leave it there. The oil companies are going to take that right out of there. They want the whole thing free and clear to move their boats and everything around. Okay, so what are these things? So these are the kind of things below this here. We'll go to the Louisiana Canal page one other day, but above, amongst the oil company canal complexes, there are intriguing sites such as this one, which looks like a circular harbor complex from ancient times. Okay, so that's this thing here. Okay, and from what I understand and looked at it, was some 300 something feet across here to create this thing here. Well, who's doing it and why? It's not the oil companies. Well, who the heck is going to do these kind of things, and how did they do it? They did dredging and all this kind of other stuff. With what? Deer antlers, boards and whatnot. Who did all this dredging and all this kind of stuff like that? And this, earthworks, shaping and making and creating, engineering. Who did it? In this far ancient past, because the water levels tell all. As John Jensen mentions, it had to be sometime like 7 or 8,000 years ago at the very least. Okay, so they show the shorelines here again. How the shoreline was in the Pleistocene. Okay, Ice Age shoreline compared to the present day shoreline. So when was that? When was it shrinking? When was it this way? Okay, increased land mass with less water. Okay, and when these things could be utilized in some manner, in some respect, because it would be dry land, not below water. Okay, who did this stuff? Huge undertakings. Cost tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to do today by with today's equipment. The race of people who built the canals and artificial pond complexes of South America were not farmers, but people who chose an aquatic environment in a flat landscape ideal for canals, ponds, and islands as their preferred habitat, sort of like a water world. Okay, so we find these oversized artifacts such as harpoons and knives in the middle of New York State. There was a lot of water in New York State. Okay, what are you spearing with a giant harpoon? It's not a spear to kill a deer with or anything, but it's a giant harpoon. Why are you buried with that in the middle of New York State for? An oversized one that no average person could handle. Okay, maybe to kill that underwater leopard thing that the Algonquin were talking about. Remember, the Algonquin occupied all the territories that the Iroquois moved into, supposedly. So, who else were the Algonquin? Maybe the giant humanoids were included in with the Algonquin, but they're making that error in judgment because they don't consider that they were real, any giant humanoids there. So, again, this aquatic environment, okay? So, when you find the giants buried with, the Bell Beaker culture people buried with salmon bone necklaces, okay, and you're finding about this huge, farming, fish farming on a huge scale, okay, what was primarily their diet, okay, whatever they were growing, vegetable produce, and whatever other plants they needed in a highly managed agricultural system, demonstrated again in Charles C. Mann's book, talked about it on his channel. All right, it seems like on an industrial scale. Above in the wet season, vast tracts of the Amazonia and the Beni region of Bolivia become submerged by floodwaters. The peoples of the Beni floodplains, for example, lived on artificial mounds and built long, straight causeways and canals for transportation. They also created great numbers of huge artificial ponds, probably used for the capture or storage of fish stocks. Okay, so let me impart a story to you from my own research about peoples in North America, in northeastern North America here, who also did a similar thing up in the Green Mountains in rural Connecticut. Okay, I'm not going to the videos, my research videos on my channel where I'm in the field to show you these things, but there were some ancient dams along a brook where I am in the Green Mountains in Connecticut. Okay, and during the summer months, this thing is left to flow freely because the dams were dynamited sometime to allow for the artificial Candlewood Lake for the first hydroelectric dam. Okay, so they had to break these things free, although they allowed water to run through it all year long through these wooden pipes that were embedded in a sort of concrete in these things. At least one of them I showed in my video. Okay, but they were dynamited into various chunks of the dams from all over the place. But in between these dams, because in the summer months, the brook ran dry. Okay, so if the brook is dry, you don't have any access to fish. But if you allowed a damming of it to occur, okay, you could stock fish between the two dams. There were 3 dams total there. And you could stock fish there all year long. Okay, when the brook finally ran dry deep in the summertime, okay, there's enough water and fish stock there to live on. Okay, what was their diet? They weren't just simply vegetarians with big cow guts. Okay, they were eating the stuff out of the water primarily. That's why they could keep their teeth so well. All right, so they're not eating a lot of red meat and not eating red meat at all. They don't need to. The bounty of the water is incredible. Just compared to the land mass, right? What it would produce at certain times of the year. It's just throwing a net and just stuff comes out. Just one after another. Boom, 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 boom. It's like, amazing. So, and perhaps you can do that yourself by managing it more in an intelligent way and have stock all the time. You don't have to go far for it. You don't have to go running around trying to catch it and all kind of stuff because it's right there. Okay, and when you want some, you just take some nets in there and whatnot and grab some fish, and that's it. Look at these beautiful golden fish here. Oh, they look gorgeous. I bet you they're good to eat too. There's not too much pollution there now. But here's some artificial ponds and stuff. Example of artificial ponds in Beni region of Bolivia. So you notice they have a particular shape. This sort of, flat iron shape here for some reason. Okay, why are they doing that? Obviously for a purpose. Everything is for a purpose, not for no purpose, just to be funny or whatever it is, like the nubs. I was just looking at a nub video by Ziggy Dan, and a really cool one about these creek um, nubs on structures there. What are they for? Well, they're not for nothing. Somebody had an idea of what they were in the past. Just because we can't figure it out right now doesn't mean they were for nothing. They were for something. Somebody could explain it all to you back then if you ran into them. It's not like they would be like, oh, I don't know, my boss told me to do it. You know, I doubt it. But in any case, here's some artificial ponds here. The lower left-hand pond measures approximately 4 kilometers, or 8,000 Sumerian cubits, which would be 20 furlongs, or 2.45 miles long. Okay, so 2.5-mile long earthworks, artificial ponds. Okay, so who's doing this? People with deer antlers, with their privates flapping around under grass skirts, and because that's what they have us believe, right? Do you think so? I mean, do you think, somebody of some greater intelligence would be organized and, managing these things on a much higher level, a higher level of discipline? When European explorers traveled through Amazonia in the 18th century, they thought they were in pristine forest. They were unaware that the region at one time had a population in the millions, although Spanish conquistador Francisco de Orellana, who traveled in the Amazon in 1542 from the Andes to the sea, had reported large populations, including stone-built cities. Close-up study of areas of the Amazon suggests a great number of natural ponds have been adapted for use as artificial ponds and served by a network of access canals. Okay, like these artificial ponds here with access canal going down, splitting them, all these other shaped ones, and all for different purposes of harvesting fish. Great numbers of people can be fed by the waterways just so readily and everything. Okay, agriculture is labor intensive and everything, and hunting down all the inland animals till they disappear would be not a smart idea, especially if you needed their resource from time to time for whatever resource the animal would provide. But you're not having it every night for dinner. Okay, maybe some animals were like wild turkey, which seemed to be easy to keep, right? If you wanted to have turkey, some piece of cake, and you know, I think the meat from fowl is also of a different consistency than red meat. So look, I mean, these farming, mostly aquatic farming, going on here, and that's what the story is. Okay, what was their primary source of their diet? Oh, if this goes back into the ancient past, well, guess who's living in the ancient past? Giant humanoids. With the clearance of the Amazonian forest areas in recent years, large earthworks, which came to be called geoglyphs, and just before that, this Earth Movers of the Amazon by Charles C. Mann. Okay, Charles C. Mann did a book, which I love to review too, about the Earth Movers of the Amazon. Okay, we're talking about a totally different civilization, an unknown civilization from the far ancient past. And nobody talks about, nobody knows about. It's all this other baloney and bullshit. They say, they know everything. They know the whole historical timeline. Do they? All these new discoveries. There's just so many new discoveries to make all around the world that have gone uninvestigated. They just don't have the time and the money and all this kind of people and personnel to do all of it. Everything will never get to the bottom. It'll just be forever. And that serves whoever the non-human entities, serves them well. We'll never get to the bottom because it's a snail's pace to look at all these things and say, wait a second, and by the time you learn it in school, whatever, it's like, when these things are found out, it's not till 50 years later you're even hearing about it, and it's a blip, like a speed bump. So earthworks, which came to be called geoglyphs, came into view. Obviously, at the time these earthworks were constructed, they were not constructed in forest, but in clear land. Also, they were not geoglyphs in the sense of giant drawings on the ground, but had practical purposes such as residential areas or water storage, fish farming, etc. Okay, again, first thing that people, nobody said yet, wait a second, they're circles because they're astronomical, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so look, they had practical purposes too. Maybe they were both, all right? But the practical purposes seems like something that you do every day with, okay? And whatever other purposes, astronomical or spiritual or otherwise, you're doing once in a while, but not all the time. Is there enough hours in a day to be doing that all the time? Just not when you're living in a caveman times. Geoglyphos is the term applied in Brazil to geometric earthworks discovered after recent deforestation. Geoglyphs are not new in South America archaeology, but these are different. Massive earthworks of tropical forest soil rather than desert surface alterations. The Amazon geoglyphos present geometric forms, circles, squares, ellipses, octagons, and more, with individual forms up to several hundred meters across. Some are connected by parallel walls. Their distribution spans hundreds of kilometers, and much of the area remains forested jungle. Geoglyphos have been discovered in Google Earth, exploring areas with recent high-resolution imagery updates. Recent Brazilian news videos, 5 reports embedded below on the ground and from small planes, clearly illustrate the impressive scale, the massiveness of the amount of earth moved, and the unique monumental quality of this ancient cultural expression. The monumental quality, you mean the gigantic, the giant, oh, don't say giant quality, okay, because giants just happen to know all about this stuff, like the Adena, right, with their earthworks and their mounds and everything, and good, doing stuff on huge scales and these giant areas of earthworks, and include 40 acres, 39 acres with giant berms that surround these things. All the stuff going on in North America here. Okay, who is doing it? Okay, so look, you know people of larger stature can get a lot more work done and faster, and maybe have the knowledge to get it done faster in a way we couldn't even conceive. Typical earthwork called a geoglyph from the Acre region of Brazil near the border with Beni and Bolivia. Typical geoglyph earthworks. Above the river Amazon and its tributaries provided transportation routes into the heartlands of South America, including via the rivers Madeira, Madre de Dios, Beni, and Mamor into the Beni region of Bolivia. Note how the canal Casacari joins the Rio Orinoco to the Rio Negro and thus the Amazon, which is up here. This canal, artificial canal, dug between these two rivers. Okay, so how much is that going to cost in today's terms to dredge that out, to dig that out and dredge it out and everything, and get it all nice and settled and done? Okay, what's that going to cost by today's dollars? All right, but people with grass skirts and running around bare feet were doing it, no problem. Okay, something else was going on. Above this section of the ancient engineered canal joins the river Orinoco to the river Amazon. See Canal Orinoco to Amazon page. We look at these things some other time. Its own, complete set of aerial and satellite photographs. 700-foot thing here. Above example of man-made canal in Amazonia, there are many examples linking rivers and tributaries and giving access to oxbow lakes and ponds. Okay, it gets more involved with more photographs. They're giving like sort of synopsis here of some satellite photos. The upper entrance to the interlink joining a tributary to the Amazon showing signs of canalization. So a lot of canals being, dug in the far ancient past. Well, it's not just a simple thing to just dig up some, do some canals or whatever it is. And why the focus on this everything? Why is this necessary to be done? Okay, so again, when you hear about all the management that's going on and what these people were primarily eating and everything, it makes a lot of sense. When you hear about the ancient giants having perfect teeth, because it seems to me that they were eating mostly the bounties of the waterways, okay, and not eating a lot of red meat. And it wasn't, they admired the land animals and revered them, and probably only used them when it was absolutely necessary. Otherwise, they knew they were going to overhunt and kill them all and make them extinct real fast with populations, incredible millions of people. Okay, real easy to overhunt, right? Just like today, it's the same sort of problems. Again, that would take some organized, level of thinking about their environment, and seem to be they could think like that because they're managing their environment to such a high level agriculturally and with agriculture concerning the farming of fish and the bounty of the waterway. Who knows what else they were able to grow and do and whatever there. Aquatic plants as well, edible aquatic plants that may have long been extinct from a far ancient past. Lots of plants went extinct. Don't think just animals went extinct in the late Pleistocene and early Holocene. A lot of plant species also went extinct. That's why they say we can't figure out where corn comes from. Well, maybe it's coming from a long extinct plant. Do you ever think about that? Well, how are you going to examine that? Okay? Or I'm the first one to think of it? Come on now. So they can't figure out where it comes from. Well, I'd be looking at that. Extinct plants that may have led to corn. How come they're not looking at that? They just like they give up? And it seems like they do, because if they pursue it any further, they have to say we are scratching our heads and don't know and can't figure it out. And what century are we in? We can't figure that out. Yeah, well, that's because something went on in the past that you have led to believe did not happen. You have this cockamamie made up past by guys like Titus Flavius Josephus. Yeah, he went in the Bible. There's people, there are giants in the Bible. This guy is rewriting it for this guy right here, Titus Flavius. Okay, how do you think that went? Okay, went to Rome in the entourage of Titus, becoming a Roman citizen and client of the ruling Flavian dynasty. Hence, he was often referred to as Flavius. Jewish history, the Maccabees, yeah. Titus Flavius looking over his shoulder. How'd that go? Real good. Example of artificial ponds and canalized rivers alongside Rio Parana. The oval pond is about 125 meters or about 450 Sumerian cubits long. This tributary running down in the Rio Parana has been heavily modified with canals, islands, and ponds. The complex continues alongside the Rio Parana, and just looking at these satellite views of these artificial islands and ponds that are created in these areas, and all these squiggly lines and all this kind of stuff, and seems to make no sense in a way. Like, okay, so you see repeating themes here of the artificial ponds and the canals and everything, but what are they doing there? And they seem so irregular, not really super organized, but they didn't need to be. Okay, they were only organized enough to this at this level, which shows at least some level of organization. Okay, they didn't make it perfect squares or whatever it is, or all these squiggly lines that they need to make there. Okay, perhaps they knew what uh, Victor Schauberger knew, that water flows best when it's in a squiggly line, not a curved line, not a straight line. It does not flow best. Water does not flow best in a straight line. He figured that out. He's a genius too. Wanted for his UFO motor. So it makes me think of this. Makes me think of the stone walls of New England. That when you look at it from the satellite view and a lidar map view, okay, that don't make any particular sense, okay, but as you get closer to them, they seem to have a level of organization that represent specific things, okay, just like these things here that they're calling here, all right. You know, it seems willy nilly here to us, but whenever these people were doing these things, it made perfect sense to them. And again, like how water flows, it flows best through these curves here to speed it up or slow it down. Again, in my research at Mallory in rural upstate Green Mountains there in the middle of nowhere, okay, where it seems to me that the brook was engineered to be in this S curve, was a representation of a snake, but not only serve as a representation of a snake in the brook there, created that way by piling stone on opposite embankments to channel the water into a snake shape. All right, but as a way of engineering the thing so water could travel faster and better down this way, they needed that. As the water dwindled, it would be to their benefit to have this thing, this brook, engineered to be that way. Above example from Rio, Paraguay, showing how complexes of river bends have been adapted with transverse channels to provide river access to oxbow lakes, converting them into ponds and harbors adapted from the original natural levees. Okay, so all this website here, atlantisbolivia.org, goes into this further. We have to take a look at that some other time. I don't want to make this video too long. I just wanted you to see these outstanding aerial photos of the images of these places and these, just huge engineering products in the middle of nowhere and the jungles and everything. And who's doing these things, okay? And what it would take to do these things by today's standards. It seems impossible that people in this ancient time would be doing such a thing. Typically utilized oxbow lake formations in the Beni region of the Rio Mamor, interconnecting feeder channels have been dug to supply the naturally curved lakes with water and access. Many oxbow lakes appear to be joined by interconnecting feeder channels, which also give water access from the main river. Example of artificial ponds and islands in the Pantanal region of Paraguay. Example of artificial ponds and canals in the Gulf Coast region of Louisiana. Okay, what's going on down there in North America? South of where I'm at. Above example of hilltops surrounded by the remains of concentric irrigation channels and remains of fossilized agriculture system on Altiplano, Bolivia. Above in this close-up view, the fossilized agriculture system appears as parallel embankments and earthquake fissures can be clearly seen. Okay, who knows what catastrophes in the past put an end to these cultures, and then later cultures picking up the mantle from either the survivors or whatever surviving information they could glean just through observation. Who knows? And how many cultures lived one on top of another and adopted what? Okay, if it was such successful way of managing things, why didn't it continue into modern times? Well, it did with some cultures, but others, it just died out. Above, this photo clearly shows how the ancient disused system of agriculture has been abandoned and built over by later peoples who constructed walled enclosures, the thin, sharp lines. Hence, site visitors usually only see evidence of the later peoples. It's interesting that they say that. Above, this ringed hill on the Peruvian side of the Altiplano shows the remains of concentric irrigation channels, which would originally have supplied terraces and agriculture on the hillside, now disappeared. Above close-up view of the concentric rings shows these circles to be the remains of concentric ancient irrigation channels on this ridge south of Turco near Oruro, Bolivia. Irrigation channels. The above canal in Tabasco, Mexico, measures 208 feet wide, the same as two sections of similar canal near Oruro, Bolivia, which I took a look at. So, yeah, it's similar. It's 200 feet wide. 200 feet wide canal right here. Above oblique view of section of unexplained canal, 200 feet wide near Oruro, Bolivia. Unexplained canal. Above the satellite measures another section of canal near Oruro as 200 feet, 60 meters wide. Okay, so who's doing this 200 feet wide, 60-meter wide canals back in the far ancient past? Well, I'd like to know because I'd love to get them on my work crew here because we don't need any machinery, just sheer manpower to do all this stuff. Seems in a relatively short period of time, but extent and the copious amount of earthwork there. This plot in Tabasco, Mexico measures 1,650 feet per side, which would be 1,000 Sumerian cubits of 19.8 inches per side, or 10 by 10 stades of 100 Sumerian cubits per side. Okay, so these squared off areas for some reason. Okay, what's the reason? Okay, and do they have openings in all of these over here? Are they enclosed? Okay, again, I'm thinking about the walls of New England. Above this block of Tres Zapotes, Veracruz, Mexico, measures 1,650 feet wide, so is 1,000 Sumerian cubits square, and is divided into strips of 200 by 1,000 cubits, i.e. 330 feet wide, which would also be 96 by 480 Mayan hue knobs. The Mayans got that passed on to them by what they could figure out from the people who were there before them. Above these adjacent plots near Tacum, Peru, are 330 feet wide, which is 200 Sumerian cubits of 19.8 inch, or one state of 330 feet, as found on the Bolivian Altiplano. Okay, who's doing this stuff up there? And for what purpose? What kind of agriculture? What were they doing? And why such huge production on an industrial scale? Plot measures 3,300 feet square. These channels on the Bolivian Altiplano northwest of La Paz region are in regular plots of 330 feet, confirming the use of the 330-foot stade to describe the rectangular plain next to Lake Pupo. They're huge. For what reason and what purpose? The above earthwork in Acre, Brazil, not far from the Benin-Bolivian border, measures 200 Sumerian cubits wide. The above earthwork in Acre, Brazil, not far from the Benin-Bolivian border, measures 500 Sumerian cubits wide. The satellite measures the intended distance between the pyramid of the sun and the pyramid of the moon in Teotihuacan, Mexico, as 2,640 feet, which would be 2,400 Sumerian feet. In Sumerian units, it would also be 1,600 cubits, 4,000 links, or 4,800 sushi. For the ancient city of Teotihuacan in Mexico, archaeologist Stewart and Drucker proposed it had been set out in units of 105 millimeter, 31.692 inches. Unknown to them, the unit they proposed was 48 Sumerian units called Shushi of 0.66 inches, or 4 times lengths of 12 Shushi. In the units of Drew and Drucker, the distance between the above pyramid of the sun and the pyramid of the moon would be 1,000 of these units of 48 Shushi, confirming that Drew and Drucker had made the correct assessment, but using different multiples of Shushi. So, cubits, Sumerian cubits they're using. In Tiwanaku, Bolivia, Arto Poznanski suggested a unit called a loca of 175 centimeter. Unknown to him, 3 loca of 175 centimeter are equal to 10 Egyptian royal cubits of 525 millimeter. Others say a loca measures 600 millimeter, but this would be 2 times Egyptian feet of 300 millimeter. Both Egyptian cubits and Sumerian cubits can often be found together at the same sites in the Americas because the Sumerian cubit is 24/25 of the Egyptian cubit. A field which is 100 Sumerian cubits can be easily divided into 150 or 25 Sumerian cubits as whole numbers, or as 96, 48, 24, 12, 6, or 3 Egyptian cubits as whole numbers. Above the Pumapunku in Tiwanaku measures 500 Sumerian feet, or 100 Sumerian double yards wide. Above, the Mayans and Aztecs are well known for their 20-day calendars. In the oldest part of Tiwanaku in Bolivia, there exists a solar calendar of 20 months, which every 3 years also intermeshed with a lunar calendar of 40 months. How far back do these things really go? Above, when the sun reached the ends of the pillars, it appeared to stand still before beginning its journey back in the opposite direction. So, included in there with this, but weren't those earthworks just fascinating? And who are doing these things? These huge areas squared off, and you know, looking in some cases, the grid areas, whatnot, are pretty precise on a huge scale, just gigantic. And how do you do this? You know, so well without all the help of transits and measurement devices. That was the thing that C.W. Saram in his book, The First American, was talking about some of the research done in North America there. How do these people do these things without having like a professional team making an analysis of the areas beforehand and then applying the analysis to the construction of these things? It just wasn't trial and error. Again, what we refer to as caveman can't possibly be, because when you have 80,000-year-old popping corn pollen found in Mexico, that means that somebody was genetically engineering this plant sometime in the far distant ancient past. Are they less civilized, more civilized? Well, come on, think about it, okay? If the corn is impossible, just impossible to do by trial and error, and over hundreds of years of producing plants that no good to you, don't produce enough crops, you're going to focus all your energy on managing these huge crops with these things. Why would you do that with saber-toothed tigers biting your rear end? It's just not plausible at all. But the scope and scale of these earthworks in these areas, look at this grid thing here. It's just, how's that happening? How the cavemen manage all that stuff. These canals, hundreds of feet wide, with 30-foot embankments on some of these things that fought and trace these things. Okay? Who are building these things in the ancient past? These people involved with the waterways and everything, their diets, farming fish. Okay, so again, folks, the far ancient past has a history of its own that seems to involve peoples who are far more sophisticated than maybe some of the peoples who were found there initially when the supposed explorers got here or whatever. Something happened in between those times to finish off these civilizations one by one. Always Homo sapiens species wandering upon ancient ruins that they tried to interpret and decipher and whatever, and created their own civilizations in a similar manner because, of man's, habit of, copying, things. So, look, there's giant earthworks going on in the ancient past, and to what ends, and what is the purpose of all these things? Okay, well, it seems to me like John Jensen thinks that we're dealing with a population on much greater scale than we can imagine. So you have to think about it, folks. What's going on in the ancient past? What do you need giant harbors for? Okay, the transportation of material from someplace to someplace. Well, maybe we'll cover an article in the future about transcontinental travel back in far distant ancient times. And this is what was really going on, folks, and seems to be these artificial harbors and waterways all involved in huge scale production of things and transport of those things all around this planet, most likely. All right, so I thought you might be interested in seeing these things and think about it, what was going on. Just a totally different picture of the ancient past. You can't even apply anything to it because we have no idea. And the scale is just incredible. Something else was going on and what. So, anyway, guys, please do hit the like button if you enjoyed that. And please do subscribe if you're not a subscriber. We go over some very interesting stuff here that you might like to see. All right. Anyway, guys, Broadcast 7 signing out. Peace.